Hello YouTube. A few people have sent me PMs asking me for more information on my potbelly stove. So what I'm going to do today is just do you a video on how I made it, or perhaps how you can make yourself a stove. Don't think for a moment we have to use gas cylinders. I've seen some great wood burning stoves made out of ammo boxes. That's a Mark 19 ammo box. I picked that up at an army surplus show for about £5. That's your run-of-the-mill gas cylinder. The cylinder that I used is a Type D cylinder, and it's disposable helium balloon gas, and you can pick them up at most superstores with 30 litres of gas in it. When you buy it, they're about £18 or $24, and you get 50 balloons with it as well. Now what they say is when you finish with the gas, you should take it back to the retailer for disposal. So I think that they do recycle them. However, it's a disposable product. That's what I decided to make my potbelly stove out of, and it's been a great gadget. The other things that I was thinking about really was maybe a beer keg. Aluminium beer keg would make a good potbelly stove. Oil drums, small oil drums, or even a heavy gauge tin with a good lid. So don't think for a moment we have to make them out of gas cylinders. That's what came along. That's what I made mine out of. Do a Google search, helium or gas or balloon gas cylinder, and you'll find them readily enough. They're also available in the US, so you shouldn't have any problems at all getting one, because it's a disposable cylinder. The other thing that you're going to need is do yourself a design. Once you've found your container, sit down and do a design, and that will save you an awful lot of time. And then draw your design onto the cylinder that you've chosen. Some of the tools that you're going to need to make. Okay, so here's my gas cylinder that I've come across, and the most important thing is that you ensure that it's empty. You know, what I did with my helium cylinder is I left the valve wide open, left it in the garden for a couple of hours in the fresh air, and was absolutely sure that the cylinder was empty. If you were to take a cordless drill to a gas cylinder, you must expect it to explode. You know, so be very, very sure that the cylinder you're using is empty. What I've done is a rough drawing on the cylinder. Then that's I think the dimensions of the door. Those little dots around the bottom are going to be air holes, and they're going to be drilled about every 2 inches, so there's a draft underneath the fire which is going to bring the fire into life. I've taken the one of the handles off the top there, and I've drawn very roughly where I think I need to cut the top off the cylinder. Now what I did with my cylinder is I took it out in the garden when I was absolutely sure that it was empty. I laid it on its side, kind of laterally, so it's going across my body, and I took a large club hammer to the adapter, and I just hit the valve, and it just sheared off. So then suddenly I had a hole in the top of the cylinder. Now the hole in the top of the cylinder was where it enabled me to put my jigsaw blade into the top of the cylinder, and then I could zip off very roughly the top of the cylinder. What I did for the top is I went to a superstore and I bought 2 steel pie dishes or baking trays, and one of them is an ash tray that goes in the bottom of the stove to catch the ash, and the other one I turned into the top of the stove. So put your steel pie dish baking tray on top of your stove, draw around it, and then take it away, and you're going to cut a hole about 1/4 of an inch or 5 mils smaller than that tray, because what you're going to do is insert the tray from the inside. So this lip just ensures a nice tight fit that will eventually enable you to rivet it in place. So a couple of trial and error. You try and insert the dish, and when I did mine it was a little tight and perhaps not perfectly round, but eventually I got it to a stage where I managed to insert it into the tin, and it was a pretty tidy fit. Now what we're going to do is rivet it in place. But what we got going on here is we've got a heavy steel gauge cylinder. We've got steel rivets, but the baking tray is a very thin steel. And what's going to happen is you're going to tighten the rivet, and it is going to tear through this soft steel. You know, so what we need to do is to drill a hole the same size as the rivet in the top of the cylinder, so like I've done here, and I've put them about every 4 inches all the way around the top. So I've just wedged it in place and drilled the holes in the cylinder itself. Then I've put the rivets into the holes, and on the inside I've put a washer on the back of the rivet. So let's just show you that. Okay, so what I've done is this is going into the inside of the cylinder now, but as we look inside you can see that we've got a steel rivet going through a steel cylinder and then through the baking tray, but the baking tray is a fairly thin steel construction. Now when you tighten that rivet, what's going to happen is you're just going to rip through the baking tray. So on the inside we put a washer around the bottom of the rivet, and when you tighten it now, that helps hold the tray in place, and it stops the rivet ripping out through the softer metal. While I've got it here, I've also drilled holes of a fairly good gauge, about as big as my little finger, every 2 inches around the bottom of the stove. Now what that's going to do is just ensure that we get a draft and airflow under the fire that will bring the fire into life. Okay, so that's the top so far. Next thing we're going to do is cut the door open. What I've done with the door is I've literally drawn on the cylinder the dimensions of the hole that I wanted for the drawer. Then what I did is I drilled 4 holes, and you can see them quite clearly there in the corners, but they had to be of a size that I could get my jigsaw blade in the drilled hole. And then all I've done is jigsawed along the lines that I drew on the cylinder, and so eventually you end up with that piece of steel coming out. Now what we've got to do is come up with a system to make it a door. So what I did is I took a clasp off of an old padlock. So that would have been the sort of thing, a clasp that you would have put on maybe a garden shed or a toolbox or something like that. And all I've done is I've cut it in half where it would allow the padlock to go over and be secured. So I've literally just used the hinge and a couple of rivets on each side to hold it in place, and that was my door hinge. I needed a door handle, so I've just used, in this case I used a wooden ball, and that's the handle. So now I can open and close the door without burning myself. So you can see all the holes around the inside, the bottom of the potbelly stove. The other thing that I did is I put 2 bars all the way through the stove. So this is what I've used. It's a piece of threaded bar that you can buy at most ironmongers or hardware shops with small nuts, and I put 2 of those going right through the stove. Now what that gives me is a shelf, so if I want to use this stove now as an oven, I've got a shelf there. Now either I put the hot coals underneath the shelf and close the door, or I put the whole potbelly stove on the fire. And this is the sort of thing that I would make a loaf of bread with, for example. If you look at a couple of my videos, you'll see I've made bannocks and bread in the potbelly stove. Okay, just lit it up in the garden for you, just to show you that it works. If you look at some of my other videos, you can see me baking bread. I've had a kettle boiling water on the top there, and obviously if you put a saucepan or a frying pan on the top, cook your food as normal.